Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Higher Moment Mastermind. I'm Shira Lotzar, joined by Alki Thompson. We're here to support your job search. Vern is off today, so we are here to answer any job search questions that you might have. That's kind of the way we do this. I think we have a couple new faces here. So yeah, this is really about you. So whatever questions you have, Alki and I are happy to address them. I'm a career coach and a recruiter, and Alki is the same as well. And we both have a good sort of dual lens on both sides of the hiring aisle. So happy to address your questions. And we want to try to keep our questions focused on a topic that might be relevant to all people. So try to keep any sort of backstory to a minimum. We want to sort of keep it focused to the actual question. All right, so who's got a question to kick us off? Let's see. Hillary, what do you do when you're excited about a role at a small company? But find a single negative review on Glassdoor, such as a toxic work environment or HR conflicts left unresolved. Since it's a small team, there aren't other reviews to compare. Is there a way to ask the employee about it during the interview without mentioning Glassdoor? Yes. So first of all, the thing with Glassdoor, I wouldn't trust it too much because look, most people who leave companies have some sort of disgruntlement, right? Like that's often why they leave. And it could be, it could be just their relationship with their supervisor. There could be a million things. I'm not saying to not trust it at all, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on it. With that said, yes, you can absolutely address it without mentioning Glassdoor by simply asking questions about culture. At some point during the interview, say, "Hey, can you describe the culture here? Describe teamwork. How do folks get along? That kind of thing." And Hillary, what you're listening for is how they respond, not just what they say, but how they say it. Okay. So, for example, if a culture is really great overall, and then mind you, department by department might be different, but I realize you said it's a small company. If the culture is super great, the person who's talking to you is going to like jump through the call, like jump through the Zoom, like, oh, this is the best company for a family. And they will be pretty effusive about it. If it's not so great, of course, they don't want to say anything negative. So they'll probably get a little bit cagey, like they'll go, well, we're working on that. We're working, we're really striving for more teamwork, and they'll try to talk aspirationally, or they just might be a little bit. And then you may be able to probe and say, "Oh, I'm noticing a little hesitation in your voice, Susie. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Describe kind of how, folks engage with each other. Can you share with me, give me a little more color around what works? And also, what does it take you can parallel that with what does it really take to be successful here? Because then what you're doing is you're saying, you're recognizing that culture is made up of people. And people engage with each other in different ways, right? And so it might be that whoever wrote this thing on Glassdoor may not have been the best culture fit for the organization. Maybe their style of working did not fit. So I'll make this up. Let's say somebody's working for a law firm. I know Mark comes from a legal background. Law firms operate in a certain way, right? There's a certain tone and a tenor and a pace. If somebody comes from more of a creative, sort of flowy kind of environment, they may not do well in a law firm, and they might think, oh, that's a toxic place, just because they weren't personally a fit,
Hmm.
right? So there's a right place for everyone. And sometimes if the person's just not the right fit personality wise or whatever, they might have a negative experience, but it could be just fine for you. So that's what I would do. I would ask about the culture in general, and then also ask what are some of the qualities that the most successful people tend to have when working there. And then that might give you a better idea. So Alki, you want to turn it over to you for thoughts.
Yep, I fully agree. That asking questions is another way to get some color from the inside. It's not going to give you all color. Um, the good news is there's one review on Glassdoor. The bad news is there's only one review on Glassdoor, so you don't have a large sample size there. Additionally, what you could do after asking that question in the interview is then look and see what you can find elsewhere online. Even LinkedIn, maybe connecting with someone who works there and just saying, hey, I love what you all do, yada yada yada. Just was wondering what the culture's like. If they respond, that could be another way, to find out. It is a little tricky if you're in an interview process, though. You know, sometimes even though they should be on open display, employers find out you're snooping around, and I say snooping with air quotes because it's not a bad thing, but that could turn off some employers. But there's other ways. But what Shira said is the best is just ask yourself and see what the answer is, and then you can do some more reconnaissance after the fact.
Yeah, just watch their tone of voice, watch their body language, right? Because they're going to try. No, they're not going to want to say anything negative. But people hold back when they want to just be kind. So just watch tone of voice and body language. Yeah, hope that's helpful. All right, who else has a question? Peter, good to
Hi.
see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Um, so I have an interview next week. Um, and it's a federal government agency.
Oh, wait, wait, stop. They're hiring?
So I
Shocked.
would be going in as a political appointee,
Okay,
as opposed to
a
with the
hire.
career civil service.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't even
Yeah.
know they were doing those. Okay.
Yeah, nope. They've got to have people in there to carry out their policies, even if there aren't necessarily as many people there to
Okay.
carry out their policies.
Okay.
Anyway, um, so I I don't know specifically who I'm going to be meeting with or their job titles or anything like that. So I haven't had a chance to sort of, figure out my strategy yet. Um, and so I am wondering if I've been looking at sort of like the commonly asked questions list,
Hmm.
but I'm wondering if there are some things that you guys are hearing about or observing
Hmm.
that are sort of like trending commonly asked questions now, things that employers seem to be more focused on as opposed to the general sort of, tell me about yourself,
Yeah, I think
so on and so on and so forth.
one of them right now, and I would say, I would imagine in particular with the government, is going to be how do you deal with change? How do you navigate disruption? How do you navigate, how agile are you basically? I say agile in the generic sense, not the technology sense. Um, I think that's going to be pretty helpful. Um, and also how do you, well, like, how do you balance a large workload? I imagine, especially in the government right now, right? Because you have so many people who are gone, the workload's piling up, and there's a lot of stress involved with that. How do you work cross-functionally? How do you influence without authority? People these days are very conscious about you know, making sure that people, to actually to Hillary's point, right, that people are a good fit with the culture. And part of that has to do with being ready to pivot and helping others to do the same, and to make sure that when change needs to happen, that you're able to be a good influencer. So to me, that would be kind of a good theme across the board. And this is, remember, this is not just for you, Peter, right? This is for everybody here. I say anybody on this call,
Mhm.
regardless of sector or for-profit, nonprofit, what have you. That to me is a pretty big ticket item. Alki, any other thoughts?
I don't have any data or info or evidence. I would suspect to your point, being able to deal with change, being agile, um, how stretchy and flexy you are mentally, probably as well. And your approach to the workplace, I probably can guess, is probably one of the check boxes that they may ask.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't have any other real evidence, but I would be prepared to speak to those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I would even say, and I don't know if this is relevant to the government, but on a technology side, look, I mean, not to be Captain Obvious here, but more and more people are diving into AI, or some people aren't. Like it's sort of both, right? And maybe your experience with that, to what extent you use it. I don't know about the government. Like but because they're much more risk averse with things like that. But that would be another trend.
Yeah, the AI thing is interesting. So, sure, I'm a writer, and so the question, of course, is, a lot of questions are asked, and I'm sure a lot of people in other fields get asked the same question, is, sort of how do you see AI changing, what you
Yeah,
do,
what you do.
and,
Yeah, you in
and
particular as
yeah,
a writer.
I get questions like, are you worried that
Hmm.
AI might,
Yeah, right.
get rid of, right? I mean, and I fall back on the, you know, AI is a tool. I
Hmm.
decided I'm going to use it instead of letting it use
Use
me,
me. Yeah. Hmm.
and then talk about how I use AI, but what the limitations are in terms of writing for AI, writing when you're just using AI, and the importance of having a human being with a soul and a brain and a voice.
Yeah, I wonder if a good analogy is like driving a car. You drive the car doesn't drive you. You set the direction
Mhm.
of where the car should go, but it's just a tool to get you there, you know? You always have to have a human in the mix, as they say.
The other question I had, and it's sort of related to what I just asked, and it is right. It seems to me that three of the soft skills that employers are really looking for now, sort of, buzzwords are, flexibility, agility, and resilience. And I'm wondering what's the best way to get that across? Is it sort of a story from, the example? The other thing that I run into, and you're aware of this from previous conversations that we've had, is that when I start talking to going to a story, I get into grandpa mode, and they can kind of go on for a little bit. And
Mhm.
so it's a question of like, how do you tell an effective story,
Yeah, that's a great
to
question.
illustrate a point without, you
Yeah,
know,
given all the leaves on the leaves on every tree. That's actually, Peter, I'm glad that you mentioned that one because we haven't talked about that in a while. And if it's okay, Alki, if we can go here, okay? Let's just have a little conversation about storytelling. And so the way that at a high level, the way that I like to invite candidates to talk about themselves, right, when it comes to particularly soft skills is to think of it like a newspaper article. You have a headline, and the headline is sort of a short, quippy, catchy concept. You have maybe a little subhead that's just a little description of what that heading is, and then you have a story. Okay. So in this case, um, when you think about any of these qualities, and of course, there's all kinds of qualities, all kinds of skills, all kinds of attributes. Well, let's take resilience or agility or any of these things. I'd like you, first of all, to think about kind of your philosophy or your approach to it, just high level. What's your approach to agility? What's your approach to resilience? What's your approach to any of these things? And kind of keep it to sort of a one sentence, sort of a maybe I believe, or my approach is, or my philosophy is this. And then the next kind of line underneath that is what I mean by that is I'm the kind of person who, or generally speaking, this is how I approach this. But then let me give you an example. And when you give the example, you give the story. A lot of folks like me and Alki will give you these little formulas, right? So some people use the STAR method, situation, task, action, result, these things. I happen to like CAB, challenge, action, benefit. It's all the same stuff. It's just a story. But when we talk about a story, just like you're reading a book or watching a movie, there's a cadence to it. Now, of course, a movie is a couple of hours and a book is a couple hundred pages. And obviously, you don't have that length of time. Okay. And you yourself are a storyteller, Peter, right? I know because you're a writer and you've written in books and stuff. Um, and so, what you're looking to do is tell that story in a way that has a nice little cadence. And I would say keep it to 1 to 2 minutes. Very short, hopefully on the shorter side of it. And I would practice your stories. So you have a good opening. So let's say that let's say you use the CAB model, challenge, action, benefit. So what I like to say in your mind, this is how I like to say it. Once upon a time, in your mind, that's a really good way to kick off telling the story. In your mind, once upon a time. Now, here was the challenge. that we were setting, that we were facing. The organization was facing a challenge. I was facing a challenge. The department was facing a challenge. We had to do whatever it was. Okay. And these are the actions that I took. I did A, B, C. Now, but when you're telling the actions, you're trying to map it back to the point, which in this case is resilience or agility or whatever it is. You're not just telling a story, you're telling a story for a purpose. You're making a point. Okay. So whatever stories you have, and this is good for everyone to think about, first you have your bank of stories. I like to call it arrows in a quiver. So you've gone to the archery place field, right? You got a quiver over your right shoulder. You got a bunch of arrows in there. All of those arrows represent your stories. When you pull out a story, you're trying to target it to the right bullseye. So these bullseyes are all these questions that are in front of you. So somebody comes to you with a question and it's about agility. You're going to pull out a story that you believe reflects your ability to be agile, and you're going to target that story to that to that bullseye. So when you're telling your story, the action part of the story is you're narrating that piece. And so what you're saying, Peter, is, let me share with you a story about my agility. So once in your mind, once upon a time, here was a challenge. Here were the actions I took. Now, here's the thing, when you're telling the action part of your story, you're not just sharing what happened. You're actually explaining how you were thinking. You're narrating your own story. Good storytelling in interviews doesn't just say linearly, I did this and I did this and I did this and we did this and we did this. You're going to say, I did this and let me tell you why. Let me tell you what my thinking was. Let me explain to you or the team, our approach to this, or why I made the decision to pivot at this place. The employer is only asking you about your stories because they want to get an indication of how you're going to behave in the future. That's the only reason why people ask you past-based stories. They don't really care. What they really care about is, how do you think? You're bringing yourself with you to your next job. So they're trying to get a sense of all these things. Are you an agile thinker? Are you a critical thinker? Are you resilient? Are you whatever? How did you handle a failure? A lot of people ask that. What lessons did you learn? That's what they're really asking. What did you learn from this? How'd you grow from it? What have you learned about yourself? Everybody's doing their best to try to understand who you are. And they're using your storytelling to get at that question. So keep it short, minute, maybe two. Challenge, what was going on? Action, what did you do? And then the result or the benefit to the organization, the result of what happened. If you can put some metrics around that, not everybody can, not every profession lends itself to metrics, okay? But if there are, increase of this or savings of that or whatever. But even if you don't have those things, at least to be able to talk about a good outcome. And by the way, the good outcome could be a lesson. Maybe the thing fell apart. Not your fault at all. It just happened. But what I learned from that is what we learned as a team, we got better as a result, right? We failed forward or failed up, as some people like to say. We learned continuous learning, continuous improvement. So it's not always just saying, pat on the back, I did such a great job. There's so many variables out of your control as to why something goes well or doesn't. But what did you learn? And now going forward, when I handle blah, blah, I'm listening and learning and I'm anticipating better so that, right, we can have a better outcome because we're always on a learning curve. Is that helpful? Alki, thoughts?
Thoughts? This is one of those that's a whole seminar.
A whole seminar, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. What I'll say first to try to keep mine really brief is technique, method, their motivation, and authenticity. So to reiterate what Shira said, because not everybody can do this. If you really stop and think about it for a second, you're being asked a question that has a lot of components to it, and you're having to process all of this probably within 13 seconds of them
Yeah.
asking the question.
Yeah.
You're trying to pick a story. Okay, let me run through my mental file cabinet. Which story am I going to use? Okay,
Yeah.
agility or resilience. You're running through your file cabinet really, really quickly while they're talking, and it's not really great to be thinking while they're talking because you need to really be listening, but you're having to process so many different things. Why are they asking that question? Do I
Mhm.
have an example of that? Does my example fit what they're asking?
Mhm.
I've been bombing so far in this interview. Seems like the last question. I got to really be impressive on this last question. There's so many things happening. So I want to just say that no matter what questions are asked in the interview, in your brain as you prepare for interviews, everyone on this call, one thing that people don't do a lot in their interview prep is just think about why certain questions are asked. As a recruiter, I've got reasons why I ask questions. To me, this is the thing I love about my job the most. It's asking people questions, and it's because I love learning people's stories and picking through their brains on why they did what they did and what motivates them and why did they choose the job they did and yada yada yada. There's reasons for these questions. Now, sometimes they just have a script and they just have to run through the script, but they're still judging you and evaluating you against other people. So that's some of the motivation is like Shira said, how do you think? How do you process? How do you handle certain situations? Have you dealt with the situation similar to the industry that they're in or with the work that they do? How does your answer compare or separate you from the other candidates that they're interviewing? We do this all the time. I'm like, all right, John really answered that question well, but wow, Sarah didn't really do a good job on that question. That doesn't even fit what we do. Or I love the fact that he was able to admit, to Shira's point, hey, we didn't get it right that time. It wasn't necessarily our team's fault, but this is how I handled it. This is how I tried to dig us out of a problem. They love and we love authenticity. So no matter what question comes your way while you're doing all the processing, I would add in be authentic in your
Yes.
answer. You can't answer everything in like a 2 minute window or 1 minute, even though I also say what Shira said. Keep it under 2 minutes. You can't talk any longer than that. If you can, you got to be able to tie all of this together, which is why you practice. You got to be able to tie it all together and be able to give an answer that answers all of that in less than 2 minutes. But at the end of the day, this is just like your neighbor, your cousin, your last coworkers, your future coworkers asking you a question across cubicles or in a meeting, and you're just giving the best answer that you possibly can. But you also want to show, hey, here's the problem. Here's how I dealt with it. Here's how I processed through it.
Yeah. That
You know,
authenticity piece. Sorry, Peter, go on.
no, I was going to say just I tell people that the reason I'm a better writer than I am a speaker is because, word limits.
Mhm.
Um, but and I found that out, the other day I was doing a practice with someone and they asked me a question that I had answered in an interview a year ago where I had the answer down in less than 2 minutes and they timed me and I was like 4.5 minutes. I mean, just because I was so out of practice.
Yeah.
Um,
It's very important to try to shorten it because, people can only have so much bandwidth to listen to details. You got to keep it high level. Think about what are the most important elements of the story, the most important elements, and try to highlight that. Zero in on whatever the quality is that they're trying to look for. How can I best express that quickly? Quickly. When
Can
people
we
go on to the detail, you're going to lose people. Yeah, Alki.
should we do one little example for them? Can I pop you a question and you answer?
Sure,
I know I'm not in charge here, but I thought that would be good.
go for it.
Um, so Shira, tell us about a time post-COVID that you lost half of or more of your team and yet you had to rebuild your department.
Okay, so I would have to make that up because I don't have a team. Do you want-
Exactly. Exactly.
why don't we try one that's a little bit more relevant? Can you think of one? I'd like to be able to
I
like
did that.
authentically tell the story
I did it on purpose, but
on
anyway, okay.
purpose.
Yeah, it's just role playing. But
Yeah.
anyway, all right, let's say. So Shira, tell us about a time where you had a set schedule for the week and an emergency happened and you had to totally change directions to respond to the emergency.
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, I want you to notice actually how I'm responding to Alki. I just want to know what I just said because I don't have an actual story that's coming to mind immediately, but I'm saying that's a great question. And one of the things I'm going to narrate myself as I do through this is you can buy yourself some time. That's a great question. Pause, pause. Let me think about that for a moment. Pause, pause. And by the way, you can reframe the question back. Let me just do that back to Alki. So Alki, that's a great question that you just asked. Can you give me a little bit more color as to what kind of response you're hoping that I would share?
Sure. I heard that you were working on a project, a new project with a bunch of volunteers that's going to help a lot of people. And I heard that in one of your meetings, you were plotting and planning a whole strategy, but then you learned that that wasn't going to service the group that you're working with, and yet you're on a deadline and you had to totally change directions. How did you process through that?
Thanks, Al. Thanks for the reminder as to where you're going with this. Yeah, so Alki, thanks for that question. So I am currently engaged in a project called Higher Vision. The purpose of Higher Vision is to support the federally disrupted workforce by providing a networking opportunity for folks to collaborate so that they can help each other find employment through their networks, and particularly on LinkedIn. And as I pulled together my volunteer team, I got a lot of great input as to maybe where the direction of this organization should go. And at one point, we were thinking, by the way, everybody, this is a real story. Okay. At one point, we were thinking that maybe we should have a process whereby the job seekers go through a branding process and then networking and then how to land the job. And we were all in that position until I had a call with a few volunteers where they said, you know what? That's a little bit too broad. Well, you probably should narrow your focus. I said, you're right. Originally, my thought was to really focus this on networking. And because we had a deadline here, we really wanted to get this project up and running. I literally did. I pushed aside other projects over the course of about a week. And I went heads down and I worked late and I worked into the evenings. And I said, okay, how can I do this website in a way that is focused clearly on the networking? And I literally did. I pushed everything else aside. And then by Wednesday night, which was the other night, had a call, rolled out this new website and said, okay, this is what I'm thinking. Hey, say Smeeze, what do you think? And sure enough, it really hit the mark. But I had to push things aside. And now, yesterday, Alki, thanks for the timing of this question. I then wrote to my client. I said, I'm ready to work on XYZ. You should have this deliverable over the weekend. But I pushed it all aside so that I could make room for what was very timely. So thank you, Alki. So hope that's helpful to everyone here, right? Is really is creating, you tell a little bit of the backstory. What are you talking about? What's important? When all of you are sharing your story, you have to remember the employer doesn't know the company you used to work for. They don't know the mission. They don't know that your team deliverables. They don't know anything. If you just go straight into a story without giving any bit of backstory, you're going to lose them. So you need to have at least a couple of sentences. Hey, let me tell you a story from when I was at ABC organization. And then quickly, our mission was X. Quick. A sentence. The purpose of our team is Y. In this particular case, we were tasked with, our challenge was to do blah. Bump. Mission of the organization, role of the department, your role in that department, and then specifically what the challenge was. And then you want to build a little bit of drama around it. Alki, before I go to Julie, anything you want to share about my story or?
Well, first, good job because I threw you on the spot completely. I won't add to the story, even though that is correct, what you just described. And it takes practice because you got to be able to think on your feet to do that. Shira and I do that all the time because we talk to people all the time. Not everybody who's in the job market practices interviews or does real time, back and forth like this all the time. So we have to think on our feet and flip up all the time. But so do a lot of you all too. If you've been in the workforce, you've been in situations and on teams where many things have happened. The problem is a lot of times is, are they asking you a question that you can speak to right away? And again, you have to flip through and shift through your files just to think of a scenario that applies. The other thing I was going to say, I was typing it and then I just said, let me say it. We're also as recruiters and employers asking questions to get an idea of how you think, but we're also trying to get an idea of what type of a team member, leader, coworker you would be in real life scenario, real life situation. And this has a lot to do with what you did and what your capabilities and qualifications are, but also the fit part of hiring. Hiring and interviewing is about qualifications experience and background and capabilities, and how you fit. If you can do the job, that's the first part that we usually are checking. The other part is your fit. How are you going to fit into our environment? How are you going to fit in this department? How are you going to fit into our industry? And they're trying to get an idea based on how you talk, how you process, how you enunciate, even though it's unfair to judge all of those things. And hopefully, good employers will understand you can be a little nervous. This question was on the spot. But you do have to think when you're being asked these questions, they're trying to get an idea. What is she really like? What is he really like in different scenarios, emergencies, good days, bad days, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Thursdays, if we travel, if we go on trips, working with clients, working through low budget situations, working through layoffs. They're just trying to get an idea of how you are and how you would fit.
So Alki, this is a great point. And Julie, I do see your hand. And I actually wanted to share a story of somebody I interviewed yesterday along these lines of who you are. So I was interviewing somebody and she was explaining to me her reason for wanting to look, to move out from her current role. And she mentioned that she is a very small staff. She's running a very small association. She's one person and it's a startup and all of these things. And she's burned out. She's just burned out, under-resourced. It's just, and I appreciate that. Well, later on, I was probing about her work ethic because it was something that the employer really wanted me to dive into. And man, she just answered a question that's showed me that this candidate will run the mile, work all the hours, do all the things. Now, on the one hand, that's great, right? Meaning it's great that she has a great work ethic. I also picked up that she is the kind of person to burn out because she doesn't have a lot of boundary setting. And I thought about my client. My client is very similar, the person she'd be working for. And I actually said to the candidate, I said, I coached her a little bit around boundary setting because she's going to bring herself to the job. But I said to myself, and I said to her, this is something I would want to talk to the employer about, and I'd want you to talk to the employer about, because on the one hand, yeah, you guys are going to run the mile together. You're going to accomplish great things. You're going to both have a great work ethic. However, you might burn each other out. You're going to be so involved in wanting to produce that it could be stressful for both of you. So both of you are going to have some limits and how you approach this work together, right? So there's a flip side to every strength, right? And I bring that up to all of you because I want you to be thinking about being authentic. Who are you? What are your strengths? What are your proclivities? What are your weaknesses? And your weakness is going to be the flip side of your strength typically. Be authentic around that and partner with that employer and say, to what extent was this going to fit with you, with the team, with the culture? How might I need to adapt and adjust? How do we need to adapt and adjust in order to be good partners and good teammates, right? Because what do they say? People join companies, but they leave managers. They also leave cultures. Okay. And people leave each other because of that. You're not a resume, they're not a job description. You're not a resume, they're not a job description. You're people. You have a personality, they have a personality, there's a culture fit or not. Try to get at that in the interview when you're telling your stories, when you're talking about yourself. Be authentic, as Alki was saying. The more authentic you are, the more they're going to know if you're a fit. And hopefully that's going to draw them out a little bit. And you can start asking some questions about their personality, their style, their leadership, their culture. And then you'll get to see if this actually could be a good fit for you. Okay. So it's really about who all of you are, not just what you're capable of doing. Yeah. Authenticity communicates we can trust you. That's right. Good. This was really good. Thanks. Thanks for the question, Peter. Julie.
So I have a question that I haven't had any interviews, but you know what I've been learning is that one of the questions they ask is, tell us a time when you failed or you made a mistake.
Yep.
Basically, it's made the mistake and what did you do?
Yep.
And and I've been cranking through my stories and I can't think of one. I know I've made mistakes because, you're trying to put your best foot forward. I've got one about conflict. I've got one about a bunch of different things. What do you do if you can't remember? I know I've made them, but they
I
were
would ask,
never major.
maybe you can call a former coworker or a
Call
supervisor.
what?
Maybe you can reach out to a former coworker or a supervisor. And
No. I've been in the federal sector, so they're all gone.
no, okay. So you're not in touch with any of them. You can't reach out on LinkedIn or find any of them.
No.
Oh, okay. Um, that's a great one. Alki, do you have an idea for Julie?
So what I have coached, and even just thinking about my own past and interviews that I've had in the past, there was a time when I was like, I don't do anything wrong. You know, what mistake have I made?
Mhm.
And definitely I haven't burned the building down. And that's, by the way, you don't want to tell those stories in most scenarios. If you do have a mistake story or a time that you failed for everybody that's on the call, because again, these questions can pertain to everyone that's on the call. Um, if you have a mistake story, I would find one that's, a legitimate mistake or an error that you made, but not one that like is budgetary or, costs the organization huge, but was a learning lesson so that you can be authentic. In your case, Julie, um, when you think through your entire career, even if it was something minor, like late for a meeting, late for like a little bit late, or asking for an extension on a project or something like that, is there anything really small that you may have not done perfectly? It may not have
The
necessarily been a mistake or an error, but not your best work.
the only thing I can remember that I made a mistake on was, and it was really partially, it was really kind of the supervisor's fault, which is why I don't want to use it.
Hmm.
Is I was doing a presentation, creating a presentation, and she kept reordering it and demanding, like she kept texting me and then changing the order. And she's like, I want it now, I want it now, I want it now. And in the system of PowerPoint, you can drag the different slides in a PowerPoint to reorder them, but somehow it dropped in the system. So say I had 12 slides, at the end I ended up with 11 slides. Somehow I don't know how it got dropped. So I can't even explain how it got dropped in the system. I was just reordering them and I sent them, then realized that I didn't have them all. And so I created a system that I would count all the slides I had in the beginning, count them all at the end to make sure it didn't happen again.
That's actually
What?
good. Sorry, Julie. Okay.
Well, no, go, go.
I was gonna say
Well,
that's
I mean, the thing was, the reason it was a problem was only because, like, I kept getting texts saying, change the order, change the order, change the order. I want it now. And then I'm kind of bad mouthing my boss.
yeah, that's a process that to me that's a process improvement story. It's something you even though it's seemingly small, I mean, it's
Hmm.
important to them. You learned how to create a systemic change as a result of something that kept happening over and over. And I think that's actually the point for everyone on the call is
Hmm.
not what did you learn, but did you learn something that actually helped you to create a better system for the entire team? Because if it happened to me, it could happen to other
Hmm.
people. Let's go ahead and put a process in place.
I and I know, Julie, that neither one of us are probably given the full credit to the story in this situation. I'm using, I hope we can speak to your scenario by what we're offering. Um, what I saw was opportunity also in this. So again, I'm a recruiter. If I ask someone, tell me about a time you got something wrong. And I know you're not going to do this, but if I hear, I've never made a mistake. So that's going to give me some things to think about as a recruiter who's screening you to pass you on to the hiring manager or whatever. So I don't think that any employer wants to ever hear or see, you know what? Can I get back to you on that? Because I just can't think of anything. They know that we've all made some type of mistake at home or at work. This is a scenario where you could probably do two things at one time. One, to Shira's point, you can make it team related, which which speaks to your ability to think team versus just yourself and also the impact of our work on our team. In this case, it doesn't even sound like it was your fault, but you could make it collaborative. Like, hey, one time I was working on, and to Shira's point too, you don't have to tell all the details. You can just say, me and my boss were working on a project one time and XYZ happened, or, these were the responsibilities. And I thought I had the timing on it right. And somehow in there, we lost a slide. But I yada, 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 and still delivered what was there. To me, if I hear a story like that, it lets me know, okay, she's part of a team and she's thinking team, yet she's finding her ownership in this. And then at the end of it, she's showing how she brought it back to
We,
which at the end of the day, unless it's some very, very, very one-on-one type of independent contributor type of a role, as a recruiter, I'm hearing, wow, I don't really hear a major mistake in there or a fault on her, but whatever the case, she kind of owned part of it. And then she also found a solution that benefited the team. Shira said that we didn't work on this together. I just said the same thing. We think pretty similar on the other side of the table. We're thinking when we ask you a time you made a mistake, we're trying to find out number one, can you even admit that? How real can you be? How authentic can you be? And then secondly, even in mistakes, because there's not going to be any perfect days at work, how do you handle it? So it's not like trying to find some specific mistake. It's just trying to find, can you even own a situation where you feel like, hey, I didn't do my best work, but this is what I learned from it, and this is how I bounce back.
And let me jump off of that too. And I'm actually going to go back to this interview I had yesterday because it's related to this. And that is, if an employer asks you about what we used to call weaknesses, people don't usually say that anymore. They say areas of improvement or growth, things like that. Here's what I would recommend that you not do. Do not say, well, I'd like to get a certification in this, or I'd like to improve my technical skills. And that's not what people are asking for. They're asking about qualities. They're asking about who you are, not your skill set, not your technical skill set, but who you are. And so what I like to say is, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, that it's, the weaknesses are the other side of a strength. So for example, right, somebody who is extremely detailed might tend to be a perfectionist and might tend to spend way too much time looking for perfection, looking for every I dot T cross, and not be able to get the project out the door in a timely way. Okay, so that's just an example of that. And so, Julie, what you may think about doing is just evaluate yourself, right? What's the flip side of your pancake, right? Are there some times when under certain circumstances, maybe you tend to, behave in a certain way that maybe you believe is not optimal just because your strength is this, and then therefore there's, another side. And maybe try to connect that, try to remind yourself, well, maybe how has that shown up? Have there been times when, I'll give you an example. Someone might say, that they're a really, strong personality and they're very fast paced and all these things. But sometimes when under stress, they might get a little abrupt. Some people might say that. That might prompt you to say, well, Mr. Employer, this is kind of what happens sometimes. And when that happens, here's how I try to mitigate it, or here's what I've learned, and then maybe that'll prompt, Julie, maybe that'll prompt a specific example when that happened. And I don't know, maybe the person was a little short with their colleague and I went back and I apologized, whatever it was. So I would just think about your strengths, think about the flip side of the pancake. Does that remind you of a story? And even if it doesn't, you can still talk about it in a way that is thoughtful and authentic, and where you're trying to learn and improve all the time. So hope that helps.
Thank you.
Monica.
Related to what you just said about not saying that you'd be willing to do training, I have a question about that. I'm looking to transition from USA to other sectors and perhaps the nonprofit world. I have a reasonable amount of nonprofit experience anyway, in that, I was actually paid by MENA, my main client, to work as the communications co-chair for the Small Business Association for International Companies. And so even though I wasn't working for them, technically I was being paid to. But my question is like, I asked ChatGPT, what training I should have if I want to move into nonprofits. And so it gets suggested like some certificates with Corsica, or like some nonprofit management certificate through Georgetown, or another one through University of Maryland. And so I would be open to the Corsica and maybe the Georgetown, but like if you were in an interview, I mean, it seems like if you say that you're open to that, and then it suggests that you don't have the qualifications. And so
No. Yeah. So please don't hear what I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't trying to talk about that. Yeah, actually. So no, people do want you to have more learnings and more knowledge and more
yeah,
certifications. That's not to say that you are necessarily incompetent in those areas. You're just trying to continually hone your craft.
right.
So I
Yeah,
absolutely believe that you should, when appropriate in the conversation, when they're
yeah,
asking about your knowledge of XYZ, say, look, I'm strong on this. And to hone my craft, I'm also taking a course, or I want to take a course in ABC to continually sharpen my skills.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yes, it's
Totally
not
fine.
a bad thing because I
Good
haven't
thing.
started, but it seems reasonable. Like the one through Georgetown, I think it was, it was like 8 days. You'd probably have to take time off work, but then you get
No, no,
set
no.
up with all these other nonprofit people and you do a capstone. It seems,
So just to be clear for everyone, Monica, in case I was confusing in my
yeah.
last concept, there's a difference between someone asking about areas of growth when they're
Yeah.
referring to your behavioral skills, your soft
Okay.
skills, your qualities, your
Yeah.
personality, your leadership style. That's different than hard skills, technical skills, functional skills, two different things.
Okay.
So if someone's asking about strengths and weaknesses, they're referring to your behavioral qualities, who you are. If,
Yeah.
however, they're talking about your functional skills, that's when you can say, hey, I'm looking to take a course, a certification, blah, 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 blah. Yes, yes, yes. To put it in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
bucket, that's appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sure, sure. All right. Other
You,
thoughts, other questions? Oh, Alki.
I was just going to add that, and you can usually tell too by, tell me about a time that usually is behavioral versus, um,
Yeah, that's a
you
good point.
know, what's a weakness or yada yada, and how do you think you will perform in this
Yes.
role, or what's your level of acumen or
The
understanding? Those are starting
proficiency.
to get
Yeah.
to, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alki. How they phrase the question actually will indicate what they're looking for. If anyone says, describe a time or tell me about a time, that's what's called a behavioral interview question. You're telling a story, and what they're looking for in that story is, who are you? How do you think? How do you do, what's your why? Who are you? How do you behave? If they're asking, to Alki's point, proficiency, competency, level of knowledge, level of skill, that's when they want to know that the hard skill. And that's when you can say, hey, I'm also going to be pursuing a certification in something.
To that point, as another reminder to everyone on the call, be prepared to speak to every single letter and word and bullet point that you list on your resume. So if you list proficient in or degree in or master's degree or yada yada, or if you list a certain software and whatever else without mentioning the level, like whether you're intermediate or advanced, be prepared to be asked about that, which I've done it a million times. Like, hey, I see here on your resume you have a little bit of, you have some of this and you have some of that. Um, Tell me about how you use that in your last job, or tell me your level of proficiency with this tool or that software. You could be asked about that, and the thing you don't want is to be caught in a lie.
And to that point, be very careful if you're going to use AI to help craft your resume. AI can make things up. And unless you scrub that document, you may miss it. So
Yeah,
scrub it, scrub it, scrub it.
I was asked in an interview about my um, database skills, and so hopefully I answered the question right because I have used DBase like probably 30 years ago,
Wow.
but I have not used Access or anything recently. So hopefully I gave the right answer. But I mean, I did use DBase. It's seriously like in the early 1990s. That was a long time ago. I mean, I understand how it works, but that was a long time ago,
Just be
and
authentic.
not what I normally do.
Yeah, be authentic in what you know.
Huh?
Yeah. All right. Other questions before we wrap up in about 10 minutes? All right. Why don't we go ahead and do a little bit of networking? We do this sometimes. We're going to go around our I'll call it our Brady Bunch today. And let's start sharing what we're looking for and where we're looking to do it. So as some of you know, I have a concept called lane and community. So your lane is what you do. It's your profession, so in Monica's case, it's marketing, communications, that kind of thing. Your community is who you do it for. It's your sector. Now, you might have had multiple sectors. That's okay. And you could maybe tick a couple of them off. But we really want to know is the sector you're going into, if you even have one. Some people are neutral. Like you might not even have a sector you're going into, and that's fine. So if you just have a community, that's fine. But or rather, if you just have a lane, that's fine, your profession. But if you do have a community, either one that you're going into or one you've been in, please let us know. And then what I'd like to do is have people think about who's on the call. And maybe you could either connect with that person directly or say, oh, I've got a lead for you. I've got somebody that you could meet. That would be helpful. So Monica, and then Mark, Peter, Brian, Orchid. Oh, wait, we're losing people here. Okay. Monica, Mark, Peter, and Brian. All right. So Monica, you want to share lane and community?
Okay, well, I have worked primarily as a U.S. agency for international development contractor for more than 30 years, and so that would be my community international development. And so my lane is communications and marketing and strategy. And so I am looking to shift to someplace else where I can use my skills. And so I did have an interview this week related to um, senior director for the Center for Information Services at the Jewish Council on Aging. And so it was a good interview, I think, if I didn't screw up the DBase or access question. And so hopefully I'll have a second interview next week. I'm pretty sure I will. And so I'm excited about that. I have another interview today that's related to humanitarian relief, which is definitely my area. But I'm a little bit worried about that since the sector is collapsing and it's a blind ad where I don't know who the company is or the organization is. And so there are some organizations, yeah, I have a little bit of discomfort there. I mean, I would want to know who the person is, you know, and I don't even know if it's real with the way things are falling apart.
Great. So Monica, thanks for sharing about your lane and community. Mark, then Peter, then Brian.
Yes, I'm Mark Pretzat. I'm an attorney. I have always worked and I'm continuing to seek employment in the financial services area. I've always represented banks in transactions and dealings with their regulators, and other times I've worked for the government, uh, assisting them in dealing with the banks that they regulate. And so I'm looking for a non-governmental job, representing a bank or other financial services company in regulatory and acquisition matters.
Thanks, Mark. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter, and I am in strategic and executive communications. I'm also a writer, primarily doing speech writing and op-ed writing. Um, Most of my work has been done in the political, public affairs, and association world.
And Brian, are you're new to our group?
Yes, I'm new to Launchpad and everything else. So I saw this and I thought it'd be interesting to join. So I appreciate you
Yeah,
letting me in here.
great.
My name is Brian O'Connor. My most recent position was actually as a program manager, chief of staff, supporting senior directors, senior VPs, and IT global supply chain, and that was at Dell Technologies. I also have experience in basically project program management, automotive manufacturing, machining, process engineering. I was a German. I worked for the Germans for about 10 years, doing machining of brakes and pistons and custom pistons and basically just prototypes. I'm skilled at analytical problem solving. I was a Six Sigma black belt certified, went all over the country, basically just doing solving problems when I was at Bosch. After that, I was basically just when I moved to Dell, I became a process engineer. For the most part, I feel I'm detail oriented, able to navigate uh, ambiguous, high stress environments. Usually with minimal direction, and sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but that's just part of life. I think my greatest strength and maybe my weakness is I like to be very thorough and try to do the job right the first time. Sometimes it gets me a little bit down into the weeds. But that's pretty much my story.
Thank you, Brian. And Monica, thanks for putting in your LinkedIn. If others would like to put their LinkedIn profile in the chat, that would be great. You're welcome to connect with each other, put your emails, whatever you're comfortable with. We always encourage networking in our group. So with that, any other questions before we sign off? Okay. So excuse me, I'm going to formally end the call now. And then for those of you who would like to stay on the call, I will do a short prayer call for encouragement. So you're welcome to stay on for that. Okay. So otherwise, we'll see folks in a couple of weeks. Oh, and I did mention earlier in the call about higher vision. A few of you are familiar with it. It's going to be a networking opportunity specifically for those who've been impacted by the federal disruption, and looking actually to launch that the first Monday in June. So stay tuned, and I will be letting everybody know about that. All right. So feel free to stay on for the prayer call. Otherwise, happy to see you guys in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Everyone have a great weekend.
Have a blessed day.